Two people can be the exact same age and look like they belong to different decades. You've seen it happen. One person crosses 50 and somehow seems to be softening into something lighter, more open, more alive. Another crosses 35 and already looks like life has pressed down on them and left the imprint. Most people explain this away with genetics, sleep, some expensive routine. Carl Jung would tell you that you're looking at the surface of something that starts much deeper. Because what shows on a face was never really about the skin. It was about the psyche living underneath it. Jung spent his life studying the strange two-way conversation between the inner world and the outer one. He noticed that the psyche doesn't stay locked inside the mind. It leaks. It shapes posture. It settles into the muscles around the eyes and the mouth. He came to believe that a person's face, especially in the second half of life, becomes a kind of record, a slow accumulation of everything they carried and everything they refused to carry. Not the wrinkles themselves, but the quality behind them. Some faces at 70 are luminous, some faces at 40 are already shut. And here's what he found most striking. The people who kept a certain youthfulness, that hard-to-name quality that makes you guess their age wrong, usually weren't doing anything special to their bodies at all. Something was happening in their psychology, something most people never even attempt. Today I'm going to walk you through 5 hidden reasons, drawn from Jung's understanding of the human psyche, that explain why some people look younger than the number on their birth certificate. Not tricks, not routines. Deep psychological patterns that quietly write themselves onto a face over the years. And by the end, you might recognize which ones you've been living and which ones you've been starving. The first reason is that you never let the child in you die. Jung had a concept he treated with enormous respect, the archetype of the child. The divine child, he sometimes called it. It's the part of the psyche that carries wonder, spontaneity, the capacity to be genuinely surprised by something. When you were young, this part of you ran the whole show. Everything was new. A puddle was an event. You laughed from somewhere deep in your body without deciding to. What happens to most people is that this child gets slowly buried under the weight of becoming an adult. You learn that play is childish, that curiosity is inefficient, that you're supposed to have answers now, not questions. And piece by piece, you seal that part of yourself away because the world told you it was time to grow up. Jung watched people do this, and he saw the cost, not just emotionally, but in how they carried themselves. The face of someone who has killed off their inner child settles into a particular kind of heaviness. The eyes stop reaching toward things. Now think about the people you know who seem ageless. Really picture one of them. There's almost always a brightness to how they engage with the world. They get delighted by small things. They ask questions like they actually want to know. They can be silly without it costing them anything. That's not immaturity. Jung was careful about this distinction. A person can be deeply wise and responsible and still keep that living thread of wonder intact. In fact, he thought the healthiest adults were exactly the ones who managed to hold both. There's a physical reality underneath this. When you're curious, when you're playing, when you're absorbed in something the way a child gets absorbed, your whole nervous system shifts. The tension drops. The face relaxes into an open expression instead of a braced one. Do that for decades, and it becomes the resting state your features return to. The face of someone still in contact with their inner child hasn't hardened, because they never stopped letting life move through them. Jung would tell you that reconnecting with this part isn't about acting young. It's about giving yourself permission to be interested again, to not know things, to follow a curiosity that leads nowhere useful. Somewhere along the way you were taught that this was a luxury you'd outgrown. It wasn't. It was oxygen, and cutting yourself off from it is one of the quietest ways people age themselves from the inside out. The second reason is that you stopped spending your life force holding things down. This one is less obvious, and it's where Jung's work on the shadow becomes crucial. The shadow is everything about yourself you've decided is unacceptable. Your anger, your envy, your need, your grief, the parts you learned to hide before you were old enough to understand why. Most people don't deal with the shadow, they suppress it. They spend enormous amounts of psychological energy every single day keeping the lid on. And here's the thing almost nobody realizes. Suppression is not free. Holding a part of yourself underwater takes constant effort, even when you're not aware you're doing it. Jung believed this chronic internal effort was one of the most exhausting things a human being could do to themselves. It's a tension that never fully releases, running quietly in the background of your whole life. Picture what chronic tension does to a body over years. The jaw stays slightly clenched, the shoulders live up around the ears. The brow holds a permanent trace of the effort it takes to keep everything contained. You've met people whose faces look tight even when they're supposedly relaxed, and what you're actually seeing is the residue of a lifetime spent guarding against their own interior. The people who've done the opposite move differently through the world. When you integrate your shadow, when you stop treating half of yourself as an enemy and start letting those parts have a seat at the table, the internal war ends. Jung called this one of the central tasks of becoming whole, and the relief of it is not just emotional. The energy that was going into suppression gets freed up. It comes back into your body, your expression, your presence. People who've made peace with their own darkness often have a strange softness to them, an openness, because they're not bracing against themselves anymore. This is why forced positivity ages people. When someone spends decades performing fine, swallowing every difficult feeling, refusing to let anger or sorrow or need ever surface, that suppression writes itself into the face as a kind of brittleness. The smile is there, but nothing lives behind it. Jung saw right through this. He knew that the person who could feel their anger cleanly, grieve openly, admit their envy without shame, was carrying far less than the person who looked composed on the outside and was white-knuckling the whole time. So the youthfulness here doesn't come from being happy all the time. It comes from being honest with yourself about what you actually feel, which is the only thing that ever puts the tension down. You stop guarding. And a face that isn't guarding is a face that hasn't spent its years hardening into a mask. The third reason is that you took off the mask and let people see who's actually there. Jung called it the persona, the polished version of yourself you present to the world. Everyone has one, and you need it to function. The persona is how you show up to your job, how you behave at the dinner where you don't know anyone, the acceptable face you offer so life runs smoothly. There's nothing wrong with having one. The problem starts when you forget you're wearing it, when the mask fuses to your skin and you no longer know where the performance ends and you begin. Living entirely through the persona is one of the most quietly draining things a person can do, because it means you're never actually resting. You're always managing an impression, always calculating how you're coming across, always presenting the edited version and hiding the raw one. Jung observed that people who lived this way, who built their whole identity on the mask, often reached the middle of their lives with a strange sense of emptiness they couldn't explain. They'd spent decades being who they were supposed to be and lost contact with who they were. And you can see it. The face of someone who is always performing has a certain quality of vigilance to it. There's a subtle self-consciousness, a monitoring, that never fully switches off. It's the difference between a person who's genuinely laughing and a person who's aware of what their laugh looks like. Over years, that constant self-management leaves its mark. The features get organized around a presentation rather than a truth. Now think about the people who've stopped doing this, who reached a point, often somewhere in midlife, where they simply couldn't keep performing anymore and let the real self come forward. There's a distinctive ease that comes with it. They say what they actually think. They let themselves be seen looking foolish or moved or wrong. And paradoxically, that willingness to drop the mask is exactly what makes them magnetic. It's also what keeps them looking younger than their peers, because a face that isn't constantly bracing to be evaluated stays open in a way a performing face never can. Jung understood that authenticity is physically lighter to carry. When you stop hiding, when you let who you are and who you appear to be collapse into the same thing, an enormous ongoing effort just ends. You're no longer holding two selves in your hands at once. That integration shows. It's why people who've made peace with being fully themselves often seem to grow more relaxed as they age, not less, the opposite of what we're taught to expect. If any of this is landing, if you're recognizing the tiredness of a life spent performing, or the weight of feelings you've held down for years, then I want to point you towards something we built for exactly this. It's a guide called True Self-Discovery, 24 reflection exercises rooted in Jung's work, designed to help you find the version of yourself underneath the mask. Not to fix you, but to help you stop carrying what was never yours to carry. The link is right below. And now let's keep going, because the next two reasons are the ones most people get completely backwards. The fourth reason is that you never stopped becoming. Jung gave a name to the central journey of a human life, individuation. It's the lifelong process of becoming who you actually are, integrating all the scattered and rejected parts of yourself into something whole. And the critical thing he understood is that this process is never finished. There's no point where you've arrived, where the work is done, where you get to stop and simply be the person you've already become. But most people do stop. Somewhere in their 30s or 40s, they quietly decide they're done. Done growing, done questioning, done rearranging their understanding of the world. They lock their identity into a fixed shape and defend it for the rest of their lives. Their opinions calcify. Their habits become grooves they can't climb out of. They stop reading anything that might challenge them, stop meeting people who might change them, stop letting new experience actually enter and reorganize who they are. Jung saw this as a kind of psychological death that happens long before the physical one, and it shows. Rigidity has a look. The person who stopped growing develops a fixedness in the face, a sense that the shutters have come down. You can feel it when you talk to them. Everything you say gets sorted into categories they decided on 20 years ago. Nothing new gets in. The psyche has stopped moving, and a psyche that stopped moving pulls the whole person toward premature age, no matter what the calendar says. The people who keep individuating are a different species entirely. At 70, they're still curious about how they might be wrong, still changing their minds, still letting a book or a conversation or a grandchild crack something open in them. Jung believed this ongoing flexibility was one of the great secrets of aging well, and he was describing something you can actually see on a person. Mental aliveness keeps the face alive. The eyes of someone still becoming have a forward motion to them, a reaching, that the eyes of someone who's settled simply don't. This is the reason that has nothing to do with your body and everything to do with your relationship to change. The world hands you every excuse to become rigid. It rewards you for having a fixed brand, a stable set of opinions, a predictable shape. Jung would push back hard against all of it. He'd tell you that the moment you decide you're finished becoming, something in you starts to close, and the closing eventually reaches the surface. Staying young, in this sense, means staying willing to not yet be the final version of yourself. The fifth reason is the deepest one, and it's the one people find hardest to hear. You look younger because you're actually living your life, instead of carrying the weight of the one you never lived. Jung had a haunting idea about what he called the unlived life. He believed that the dreams you abandon, the desires you suppress, the person you were meant to become but didn't, none of it simply disappears. It goes underground and it stays there, exerting a pull, generating a low and constant weight you carry without naming it. He was especially struck by how the unlived lives of parents press down on their children, but he saw it in everyone. The unfollowed calling, the love not pursued, the self set aside because it wasn't practical. And this weight ages people in a way that nothing on the surface can explain. Think about the particular heaviness in the face of someone full of regret, someone who spent 40 years in a life they never really chose, who can feel all the versions of themselves that never got to exist. There's a downward pull to it, a sense of something unfinished sitting in them and never resolving. Jung understood that carrying the unlived life is one of the most aging burdens a person can hold, precisely because it's invisible. You can't point to it, but it's there, in the eyes, in the set of the mouth, in the whole gravity of how someone occupies their own body. The people who look younger than their years have usually done something brave. At some point, they turned toward their actual life instead of away from it. They took the risk. They followed the thing that scared them. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not all of it, but enough that they aren't dragging a whole unlived existence behind them. And that choice, made over and over across the years, keeps something in them light. There's no ghost life competing with the real one. They're spending their energy on being here rather than mourning what could have been. Jung would tell you this is the quiet difference between two people at 60. One of them chose, again and again, to live the life that was actually theirs, and it lifted them. The other kept postponing, kept playing it safe, kept setting the real self aside for later, and later never came. And now the whole unlived weight of it sits in their face. The years land on those two people completely differently, even when the years themselves were the same. This is why chasing youth from the outside so often fails. You can smooth every line and still carry the deep, unmistakable heaviness of a life not fully inhabited. And you can have every wrinkle a face can hold and still look luminous, because there's no unlived life dragging on you. You spent yourself on the real thing. Jung believed the second person had found something the first was still searching for. Not youth, exactly. Aliveness. The willingness to actually be here for your own existence while you still have it. So look back at these 5 for a moment. Staying in contact with the child in you, ending the war with your own shadow, taking off the mask and letting yourself be seen, never deciding you're finished becoming, and turning toward your real life instead of carrying the ghost of the one you didn't live. Notice that not one of them is about your body. Every single one is about your psyche. And what Jung understood, deeper than almost anyone, is that the psyche always eventually shows itself on the surface. Which means the youthfulness people are chasing in mirrors and bottles was never really available there. It was always an inside process wearing an outside face. The person who looks younger than their age is usually just someone who kept more of themselves alive, who refused to let the child die, refused to suppress their whole interior, refused to disappear into the mask, refused to stop growing, and refused to trade their real life for a safe one. And here's what makes this hopeful rather than heavy. None of it is locked. You can reconnect with your curiosity at any age. You can begin the slow work of meeting your shadow this year. You can start letting the mask slip, start questioning the shape you'd frozen into, start turning back toward the life you set aside. Jung spent his whole career insisting that the psyche can keep developing right up until the end, and that some of the most alive people he ever encountered came to that aliveness late, after decades of being closed. The face follows the psyche. Change what's underneath, and the surface eventually catches up. So the real question isn't how old you look. It's whether you're still living in a way that keeps you awake to your own life, or whether something in you has quietly started to close. That's the thing Jung would want you to sit with, because the years are going to pass either way. What they leave on you depends almost entirely on how much of yourself you're willing to keep alive while they do. If any of this stirred something, if you felt the pull of a self you've been setting aside, or the weight of a life you keep postponing, that's worth listening to. Our guide, True Self-Discovery, holds 24 reflection exercises built on Jung's teachings, made for exactly this kind of turning point, to help you find your way back to who you actually are underneath everything you've been carrying. The link is right below this video.